You may have heard the term camera raw before and not really understood what they're talking about. That's because the term raw has never officially been explained, but RAW is simply the format that's inside of your camera when it takes a picture, which contains all the pristine information about it, untouched by human hands. Now, this is an image from photospin.com, and what I'm going to do is in the Adobe Bridge, I'm going to press Command or Control R for Richard to open up this image in Camera Raw. Now, Camera Raw allows you to work on your image and not affect the image itself. In other words, it doesn't damage the pixels because we're working with the data from the camera. So that means I can close Camera Raw and open this image and continue to tweak it and never ever hurt it. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things you'll find in this interface. First of all, you'll find many of the same tools that you'll find in regular old Photoshop up here, such as the zoom tool, the hand tool, and your other tools such as crop. Now, you do have a white balance tool, which is useful for choosing an area in the image to set a white point, and already the image has changed quite a bit. And you can also use this guy here to sample colors, and it will put little dots in the interface. So let's say I want to know exactly what the pixel color information for this rose is in this spot. So I'll click, and up here I get the exact RGB values of that particular color. I can do the same thing for the shirt and for the green part of the rose. And you see it's labeled 1, 2, and 3. I can clear those samplers by clicking here. Those are very handy, by the way. I can look at my zoom level with this pop-up here, so I can fit in view or look at it in any of these increments. I can also rotate my image. I can use the red eye tool. And I have so many other tools in here that it's really not even funny. I can straighten things. I can use spot removal. But let's go ahead and take a look at this area here. What I can use to change my image are these tabs. And all you have to do is hover your mouse over them to see what they do. Here's our basic tab, where we can work with the white balance as we do ourselves as custom, or as shot by the camera, or auto. So you can have Photoshop do the white balance for you, or we can see what the camera thought was good for white balance, and custom, which we're going to do ourselves. We can also affect the temperature in the image with this slider. Look how much cooler it's getting now as far as the temperature. It's getting more blue. And I can warm it up by going this way. I can also affect the tint. I can also overexpose or underexpose the image with this slider. Recovery allows you to pull back some of the information that may have been lost when you use the exposure. So I'm going to go ahead and recover some of that detail. I can also use something called a fill light that helps me get some of that detail back as well. I also can affect the blacks and the brightness, as well as the contrast. Now currently this image looks pretty bad, but don't worry about it because, as I mentioned before, we really can't mess it up. We can always close this and these sliders will still be available to us. So I'm going to put it back on auto, and I'm going to grab my white point and just put this back to a reasonable level here. Okay. I can also adjust the clarity in the image and work on its vibrance, as well as saturation. So as you can see, you can pull a lot of color in and pull a lot of color out. We also have the ability to work with a tone curve. And you can use the sliders to actually move the curve and change how the lights, darks, and shadows appear in your image. Likewise, we also have a tab for working with sharpening tools. So we can sharpen the image, adjust its radius, its detail, and more. You can also work with your image in hue, saturation, and luminance or lightness. And what you can do is convert the image to grayscale by clicking this button right here. So we can work with the saturation and luminance. And really, I say lightness because luminance confuses a couple of people. Luminance simply talks about the brightness values in your image. So luminance is kind of like how bright or dark it is. I also have the ability to work with split toning, so I can adjust the hue, the saturation, balance, as well as the hue and saturation in the shadows. So I can work with highlights and shadows. I can also fix any lens correction with this button here. And I can also work with camera calibration. And I can save any presets I work on. So with this particular image, I did a couple of adjustments. So I can click this button down here and save this as something. So I'll call it Rose. And I'll make sure everything's set. Click OK. And then when I open up a different image inside of Camera Raw, I can apply this preset by simply clicking on it. We'll talk more about the settings on the bottom here, and we'll find out how to do something called post-crop vignetting in the next part.